Okay, I'd like to welcome everybody to the February 12th, 2014 Brentwood Planning and Zoning Commission meeting. If you please join me with the Pledge of Allegiance. Pledge of Allegiance
to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Roll call, please.
Rich Albertino.
Here.
Jake McDonald.
Here.
John Nurnberger is here. Sherry Bilderback.
Here.
Michael Daming.
Here.
Dan Glasky.
Here.
Jennifer Hansen.
Here.
David Dimmitt.
101. Here.
David Plefka.
Here.
We have a quorum, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Nuremberg. Has everyone had an opportunity to review the January 8th, 2014 meeting minutes? And are there any revisions, additions, subtractions to those minutes? If not, they'll be stand as submitted. There's no old business. New business, we have two text amendments that are before us today, and I will allow our planner, Mr. Wise, to present both those. The first is petitioner for approval of an amendment to Chapter 25, Article 4, Section 25-260 of the Brentwood zoning ordinance pertaining to permitted uses within the LID, Light Industrial District. Mr. Wise, if you could explain what the impetus is for this proposed text amendment and just give us a general overview of it.
Thank you. The city received a request several months ago to locate a chiropractor. Was the specific use within an area zoned light industrial district. Under the city's code, the chiropractor falls, it's classified as a professional office use. And that use is not currently either a conditional or permitted use within the light industrial district. We did have an alderman that sponsored the change to add the request in as a permitted use within the light industrial district. Staff has researched the proposal, has looked at the comprehensive plan as well as some of the adjoining areas to Brentwood, and is of the opinion that adding the use of a professional office as a permitted use within the light industrial district would be consistent with the vision of the comprehensive plan. Within your staff report, it kind of details some of the areas within the city that are primarily zoned the light industrial district. Those are primarily the Hamley Industrial Court area, as well as areas on the south side of Manchester. Specifically, as it relates to the Hamley Industrial Court, that area is envisioned within the city's comprehensive plan to kind of continue a transition from a light industrial to kind of a mix of light industrial with office and business use, and ultimately transition out of a light industrial area. So with that, staff thought that adding the light industrial, the use of a light or a professional office within the light industrial district would be a reasonable request. We also looked for the areas that are not necessarily envisioned to transition, like the Hanley Industrial Court area, and what the impact of that would be on those uses. And staff is of the opinion that that use would not be inconsistent with the uses in the light industrial district in other parts of town. And with that, staff is recommending approval of the request to add professional office as a permitted use within the light industrial district.
And Mr. Wise, you've had an opportunity to survey municipalities around in St. Louis County, and this appears to be in line with where municipalities are going with
That is
their light
correct.
industrial districts?
That is correct.
Okay, very good.
Particular areas that have what I would call more of a true light industrial district that has kind of that mix of business uses. You see a lot of the professional, medical, kind of that gray area type of uses locating in light industrial districts.
And that's where our comprehensive plan sees this city going.
Absolutely.
Very good. Questions? Mr. Dimmitt.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Weiss, your report, I've got two questions about this proposed change. Your report, first of all, indicates that the term professional office is not defined within the city's ordinances, and you, in coming up with your proposal, the chiropractors fall within professional office, as that term is used in the Planner's Dictionary published by the American Planning Association. My one question is, do you think, your opinion, would it be wise to go ahead and actually have a definition of professional office somewhere in the code so there's no subjectivity, or do you think we're better off not having that term be defined, number one? And number two, I'm assuming that the parking requirements whether it's a professional office located in LID or general commercial, anywhere else, it would still be the same, is that correct?
That is correct.
Okay.
On the second point, that is correct. On the first part, as far as adding a definition, what I would propose to the commission is instead of addressing the definition for professional office on this one case basis, to basically have staff put together the uses within the code as a whole, maybe put together a matrix that would outline how they all lay out in relation to each other, bring that as a full cohesive unit back to the commission, and at that point, the commission could review it, we could have the discussion within the context of the larger use terms instead of specific to one use term.
Okay, thank you.
Very good. So you agree with Mr. Demmett?
I agree.
Very good. Mr. Plufka?
Isn't there a definitional section within the ordinance itself?
Within the zoning ordinance, yes, there is. However, there are very few definitions that pertain specifically to use terms. A lot of the definitions within the current ordinance pertain to setbacks or development or some of the other issues that not specific to the use terms within the code.
So would it be okay from a language and a structure standpoint to insert this definition closer into this section rather than to some more generic definitional section?
We would go, if we were to move forward with this, we would go within what is the current chapter 25 of
Okay.
the zoning ordinance, and we would stay within the definitions of that.
I see.
And then that would also allow staff the opportunity to make sure that make sure that any changes made in this process are carried forward through the recodification process, and that all the changes get carried through appropriately.
Would it make more sense when it comes time to do something like that to come up with our own text definition, or to tie it to the planner's dictionary definition and let that be the reference?
I think that there's some good discussion there moving forward.
Yeah.
I think that the best idea would be to get the list in front of us as a comprehensive list and see, because there are times when a little bit of discretion in reviewing those is beneficial to all parties. And there are times when having, a strict definition is helpful. So I would prefer to bring it all and see how the commission felt about it.
And Mr. Dimmitt made reference to my other question, which had to do with parking. Can you envision any reason why professional offices were left off of this inclusion, included within these various uses when this was first written, or was it just something that just was left off because it just wasn't thought of?
The original
Or was there some
ordinance-
reason? I guess what I was thinking about is, the only impact I could think of was that the types of vehicles and the volume of traffic in LID might be somewhat different than what might be normally around professional offices, and there might be some sort of far-fetched safety issue having to do with trucks and lines of sight and things like that. And that's the only thing I could possibly think of as a reason not to think this was a good idea.
The only other reason why you would potentially not do it is if you were trying to preserve industrial areas as industrial areas. And that's, of course,
Which
not
would be a
what the
bizarre
city-
goal, but I guess that's,
Right. I mean, that would be, in the framework of the uses within the ordinance come from 1985 largely, and the city's comprehensive plan is, of course, much newer than that.
but you don't envision any specific problems with the mix of parking that would be engendered by a professional office as opposed to a light industrial?
I don't, and I think the reality is if you drive down Hanley Road,
Yeah.
we already see
That's a very good
similar
point.
types all along that area.
Of mixed use.
Right.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Albertino?
And I guess that's where my question comes in.
Put the microphone facing you, please.
I thought you didn't have to.
So we already have offices allowed, and there's office buildings down there. What's the difference between a non-professional office and a professional office? I mean, I see medical office use a lot, and we park that different in my profession because it's a little different requirement than a typical attorney's office or a chiropractor's office or whatever, but I'm not sure what we're defining here and why we're adding another layer onto this. What is a professional office versus a non-professional office?
I think it's a very good question. And I think that that's a discussion that I would when you look at the framework of the ordinance, and when you look within, let's say, if I use the general commercial district, because it's a little bit more applicable in this, it defines professional office as a permitted use in one area, and then it has offices as a separate use term within the same district. So within the district regulations for the general commercial office, it's clearly drawing a distinction between the two types of uses. And I think that bringing all of the uses, whether it's this or there's some service type use definitions within the code as well, that there's a lot of layover between them, and then putting all of those in one list for the commission to review, I think would be beneficial.
So the way in which the city has developed its precedent in interpreting offices as a permitted use in the LID would not include professional offices.
That is correct.
Okay. I agree with the
But we don't
point.
know what a professional office is yet. So.
Right. Further questions? Would any member of the audience like to address the commission on this issue? Okay, is there a motion? Ms. Bilderbeck?
Mr. Chairman, I make a motion that we recommend approval of this change to the code as submitted to the Board of Aldermen.
Second.
Roll call, please.
Rich Obertino,
Yes.
Jake McDonald,
Yes.
John Nerber is yes, Sherry Bilderback,
Yes.
Dan Glowski,
Yes.
General Hanson,
Yes.
David Dibbit,
Yes.
David Plefka.
Yes.
Motion passes, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Nuremberger. The next item in new business is a petition for approval of an amendment to Chapter 25, Article 6, Division 8 of the Brentwood zoning ordinance pertaining to flood hazard control regulations. Mr. Wise, if you could provide the impetus and an overview of this proposed text amendment.
Sure. So, kind of to the reason for this change, in 2012 and 2013, there were some changes at the federal level as far as grandfathering structures within existing floodplains and the rate that they will pay for flood insurance moving forward. Prior to this act, there was essentially a clause that said if you were constructed prior to a date, that you get to pay lower flood insurance rates because it was a pre-existing prior to the regulations. This act changed that and is now requiring that those older grandfathered status properties lose that grandfathered status, and their flood insurance rates will reflect the current risk as the federal government sees it. So we have several properties within the city of Brentwood that are going to be impacted by this. And we're not sure the exact extent as to far as which ones were grandfathered and which aren't. We've identified, I think it's 136 properties within the city that are potentially going to be impacted by this. So with that change coming forward, the city started to pursue becoming a member of the community rating system. And what this is, it's a program that's administered ultimately by FEMA through the federal government, and it gives member communities discounts for all of their property owners for flood insurance rates, and those discounts range anywhere from 5 to 45% of your policy value. So we started the process about a year ago of becoming a member. As a part of that, we had the state come out and they did an extensive audit of all of the city's floodplain regulations, all of our records, and they dug through everything and came up with a long list of things that they wanted to see done. One of those changes was changes to the city's flood hazard ordinance. So the ordinance the changes that you have before you come directly from FEMA as far as changes that they want to see to the city's flood hazard ordinance. As it relates specifically to this proposal, it's in an effort to have us become a member of the community rating system. So through that process we've been going through, we've addressed several issues that are not related to this, but we have started the process of moving this through. There are several changes. Several of them are fairly minor administrative changes that update flood maps, that update references along those lines. There are a couple of more substantial changes, the most of which is the definition for what is a substantial improvement. Under the city's current regulations, any property that's in the regulatory floodway or floodplain has a requirement that any improvement that exceeds 50% of the market value of the structure at that time is required to come into compliance with the current floodplain regulations. So you would essentially need to elevate 1 foot above the floodplain or flood-proof the building if you exceed improvements of 50%. That is a one-time glimpse. So if someone comes in, I believe the example was if you have a building that's $100,000 and you come in with a $49,000 improvement, you're fine, you're under the 50%, you can do it and still move forward. What FEMA is requesting that we do is that we add, and there's two options that have been presented to the commission. The first is that instead of a one-time look at the improvement, that the definition would be amended to track over a 10-year horizon. So if improvements are done within a 10-year horizon on a building that exceed 50% of the value, that it would need to be brought up to current floodplain regulations. The other option that they have presented the city with is that you just say within, you don't have a horizon, and you just say, from now until the building's in compliance, once you hit that 50% level, you have to be in compliance with the floodplain regulations. The 10-year horizon it would allow property owners to come in and make a 40% improvement, and then after 10 years that would essentially fall off the city's books, and so they could continue to go. Whereas if you were to put the kind of just over the life of the building into place, that would, we would have a hard and fast time when you say, when you hit this time, there is no improvements that are going to fall off the books. So that's the major change that is this within the ordinance itself. There was another section that dealt with recreational vehicles parked in I know there's been some discussion about that. And Mr. Chairman, if you don't mind, do you mind if I bring that up? Or?
No, of course not.
Okay. The changes to that section, essentially what they're trying to get at is to clarify the administration of that section of the code. I guess that FEMA has had several issues with it over the years. And how the section is designed to read is that you have to do Section A and Section B or Section C. So the change that FEMA has requested is that we remove the first or after Part A. And there was a little bit of concern that was raised that says simply removing the or may not be clear enough as to how the code should be implemented. That maybe there was some additional language that says, that you after A you would say you do A and B, and then after B you would say or in the alternative to both A and B you could do C. I have run that proposal by the state and FEMA, and they have both agreed that they would have no issue with that change. I do think that change would help from a property owner standpoint as well as a staff administration side to make sure that it's clear exactly what the ordinance is saying. And with that, I would...
Okay, so the understanding is that the proposed flood control ordinance revisions that are before us include that change to 25-494-1. Does everybody understand that? No, I didn't think it. I thought it's much clearer now. So the issue that we have is these changes in general, and Mr. Wise, you indicated these changes are necessary to allow our businesses to qualify for lower insurance, correct?
That is correct. And we also own a building down there, so it's the city as well.
Right. On the substantial improvement issue, what is your recommendation, either during the life of the building or the 10-year period reference?
Well, I think that both of them would be good in the city's efforts to promote redevelopment in the area. I think that if we were to go the route of not setting the 10-year horizon and doing over the course of the building itself, that would essentially escalate redevelopment along those areas. Now, with that said, there's some downside to that. with, we're gonna have property owners who are going to be impacted by this. I think I would at least open it up to the commission to say what are the ultimate goals in this corridor. And I think that you can't really go wrong either way you do it. I think ultimately both are moving towards FEMA's goals, which are pretty much in line with the city's goals for those areas as well.
And is it SEMA or FEMA?
Well, it's both. Right. So SEMA is the state level, and FEMA talks down to SEMA,
Okay.
and then SEMA talks to us, and then we talk to SEMA, and then they go back to FEMA, and it's a
Okay.
wonderful process.
So if I understand, and this was my take, so if we choose the during the life of the building option, that is more likely to facilitate development.
Yeah. I mean, I would say it's going to spur compliance with the floodplain regulations in a faster time frame. So how they would choose to go about that is, I don't want to necessarily say that they're going to redevelop a property, because each property is going to be an individual in a unique circumstance. And an individual property may have characteristics that they say, hey, instead of tearing this building down and redeveloping it, it actually makes sense to flood-proof this building instead. But I think what it will do is it will escalate the time period in which we see compliance with flood regulations, and ultimately, hopefully, minimize the amount of flood losses in the city.
Okay. Questions, Mr. Nuremberger?
Are there any homes, like personal homes, affected by this, or is it just business?
There are some homes that will likely be impacted by this as well.
So my question would be, what is the value that be set? If a house is worth $100,000 today, it might be worth $300,000 in 10 years.
Right.
So the 50% rule, how does that apply for the value of the house when it changes?
We use the current fair market value at the time that the assessment is done. So if you were to come in today, we're going to use the assessed value, the appraised value today. And if you come in 10 years and the house is worth 5 times as much, that's the value we use, is we use the value at that
So
time.
you would do an appraisal each time?
We don't do an appraisal personally. So basically what we do is for the vast majority of these right now, what we do is we go through St. Louis County's website, and they have an appraised value on there for the structures as well as the land. They separate it out for us. If we ever run into an issue where we have a property that's close, if they're on the wrong side of that, we let them know that, hey, the data that the city has shows that it exceeds 50%, and they have the alternative. If they want to submit an appraisal to the city, a professionally prepared appraisal, we can use that as well.
And in the course of, we've had some property values that have gone down in the past. What would happen in that case?
It would be the same exact situation, except it would be to their detriment in that scenario. So we would use whatever it is, whether it goes up or down, at the time when the permit is applied for, whatever the value is at that time is the value that we
So
would use.
if they only use 40% one time and then the value of the house went
So
down?
when we were to track it over time, we would not track on a percentage.
Yeah.
We would track it based off of the dollars that are invested into the property. And then we would take that, and so if you spent $10,000 5 years ago, we're not going to say, well, that was 5%, and we're not going to carry that 5%. We're going to carry that dollar value forward and add it in.
And what about the sale of a home or a business to a different owner? Would they be required to bring it up to code at that sale?
Yes, whenever a property changes hands, we have right now for residential, we have a residential housing occupancy inspection.
So they would have to bring it up to the flood codes, what
No,
I'm saying.
only if so when they do that, so right now, if you were to sell your home and you're in the floodplain.
Right.
We've got a list of items that they go out and they do an inspection for. If you don't meet those minimum items, then we say, hey, you've got to bring these things up to the minimum code. If the value of those items exceeded 50% of the structure value, then they would have to bring it up to flood standards as well.
Oh, so it doesn't get triggered by the sale?
Right, it does not automatically get
Okay,
triggered through that.
that makes it more clear, though. That's all I have, Mr. Chairman.
Okay, very good. Mr. Weiss, did you touch on the flood study that we just recently had done?
I did not. As part of this effort and larger efforts that the city's been involved with over numerous years and numerous efforts, the city did recently complete a flood study along Deer Creek. And basically what this study is, it's a little bit different than previous studies and efforts, is it's an incremental approach of recommendations for the city to move forward with to mitigate flooding losses within the city of Brentwood. A lot of the studies that we've done in the past have been on a larger scale. They've incorporated other cities in it, and for a variety of reasons, implementing those studies and those plans and those recommendations is difficult when we've had numerous jurisdictions involved. So this study that we've recently completed is looking specifically at what the city of Brentwood can do to help mitigate flood losses in the city of Brentwood. It has numerous recommendations within there. A lot of them are kind of what I would call incremental approaches that make small improvements that hopefully over time starts to make large improvements for individual properties. There are two classifications of improvements that are identified. They identify structural improvements and non-structural improvements. On the structural side of improvements, we're talking about physical improvements that are made to, essentially increase the capacity or storage of water in areas where you would want it to go. On the non-structural side, there are recommendations of essentially kind of policy matters that the city can pursue. One of those being implementing a flood warning system down along Deer Creek so that we're more proactively monitoring the water and alerting business owners. Another one of the recommendations that came out of the study was for the city to continue to pursue and become a CRS community. And so that was the study. I think that captures what you're looking for.
Okay, very good. Other questions? Ms. Hanson?
I have two questions, and the first dovetails with Mr. Nurnberger's question. You may have said this, I believe you did when you were first talking. How many homes are potentially affected? And can you ballpark for me what percentage of homes in Brentwood that is?
I believe it's, I think the number is 136 commercial properties.
Commercial properties, okay.
On the residential side, I don't know what the number is, but it's a lot. I mean, I'm gonna guess a ballpark of 20.
Okay.
So it definitely does impact some, not as large of an impact number-wise as the commercial properties.
Second question goes to the discount, the insurance discount. How is that valued? Can you educate me on how that's tied to improvements or compliance or what?
So as we continue to go through this process, once we, hopefully in the next couple of months, we will have one of the state coordinators from SEMA come back out, and they'll go through everything again that we've done, everything that they've asked us to do, and then some other items. And through that process, they will come in and they'll say, okay, you meet these criteria and you get these many points. And so you'll come in as a level 7 or 8 community, which will give you, that would give you a 10 to 15% discount on your flood insurance policy. They will also lay out criteria of how the city, other ideas the city can implement. And so that way we can say, hey, if we make this change, or if we implement this new requirement, this would bump us up to a level 5 community. I think the realistic expectation, particularly in the short term, is that we would hope to get a 10 to 15% discount.
Thank you.
Mr. Demmett?
Mr. Wise, just to make sure I understand this correctly, under the current ordinance, this 50% is in effect right now.
That is correct.
So if it's a house that's in the flood plain,
Right.
or it's a business that's in the floodplain, if they propose to do some improvement to the house or the commercial property that is 50% or more under the current ordinances, then that triggers the requirement to bring it into compliance with the flood standards.
That is correct.
Do you know of any situations where a house, someone has proposed to do an improvement on a house in the flood zone, and this provision, the current ordinance has kicked in, requiring them to make those changes?
Not with a residential structure. We have had them with commercial.
Okay.
And when I say not with the residential, not that I am aware of.
Right. Now, it may have happened before you got
Right,
here.
right.
I'm not sure how this would work, and maybe you can explain it to me. Would this apply retroactively?
No.
So to total the cost of the improvements, it would start from the date that this
Right.
ordinance is
Right.
changed.
We
You
wouldn't-
wouldn't have to look back 20, 30 years ago to see if,
Correct. We
They-
would start today.
okay. And under that $100,000 example that you used, because as I discussed with you before the meeting, that my concern here is and maybe everybody on the board understands this, I didn't understand it, but if we stick with the $100,000 hypothetical, and someone wants to make an improvement to their property, as the statute or the ordinance is written right now, if they want to make a $50,000 improvement to that property, they then have to bring the property up to code to the floodplain. A way to get around that, obviously, is just to make $49,999 improvement, and you don't have to
Right.
raise the structure or make it floodproof. But under the proposed changes, whether we go with the 10-year look back or the lifetime of the building, then it puts a burden on the city so that when somebody comes in and proposes to make this improvement to their property, right now, it'd be a pretty simple thing for you to do. You look at this and say, it's a $50,000 improvement. Guess what? You also have to bring your building up to code. But if they do a $45,000 improvement, that would not, under the proposed change, that would not necessarily trigger bringing the property into compliance, unless they had previously done a $5,000 improvement. So the city would have to then look back for that 10-year period or the life of the building to calculate all those improvements over the life of the building, see if it then satisfies that 50% requirement, right?
Correct.
And here's my concern, is with that added burden, as I said, right now, it's a pretty simple process just to look at what is being proposed and to see whether or not you hit the 50%. But by having to go back, if the city misses something, misses an improvement, and doesn't, and fails to see that it did cumulatively meet that 50% requirement, and because we miss it, the property is not brought up to code, then there is a flood, and they make a claim on their insurance policy, does the insurer then have, in theory, a cause of action back against the city for failing to satisfy its requirement? You know, because if I'm an insurer, I would say, look, I'm having to pay out on this claim for this property because the city didn't catch it. Had the city done what it was supposed to have done, then perhaps there wouldn't be this damage to this property because it would have been raised. Are we creating a duty under this proposed ordinance, the failure to follow of which creates some liability on the city's part? I don't know the answer to that. Maybe I'm being very protective.
I would say, and I can't answer your question directly, but what I would say is I think we already have some of that liability. Because right now, you know, any property that is within the regulatory floodplain, we have to issue a floodplain development permit, which, you know, is basically the process and the permit where we track all of this. So theoretically, if we were to issue a building permit without issuing a floodplain development permit, we would have that same potential liability on there from the insurer's perspective. Does this increase that? I don't know.
And I don't know if this is something we could run by, you could check with SEMA to see if they've had this type of a question, or if it's just a goofy question. It's quite possible that's the case. I'm good at asking those types of questions. But it's again, just a little bit of a concern that I have, that we are potentially setting ourselves up for some type of liability by an insurance company for failing to do what is required under these proposed ordinances.
Well, as I understood, I'm sorry, Mr. Chairman. Sorry. As I understood, Mr. Weiss, your response was that we already have that obligation in paperwork that already exists and obligations that already exist to track in homes and businesses that are in that floodplain area, to track the development and the cost of that development year after year after
Yes.
year. And those forms already exist. Those are already being filled out.
That is correct.
This would simply be one more implication of those forms.
Right.
But wouldn't create a whole new set of forms to fill out.
That is correct. It would mean that we would have to actively look back at the forms.
Right.
And that's what I'm getting to,
Right.
is that's the difference between what we currently have and what would be proposed under this change, is that it would then require the city to go back and make that calculation, which the city currently doesn't have to do, correct?
Correct.
Okay. And that's my concern, is if someone, human error, misses that, and then the change is not made to that piece of property, then there's the flood. Insurer comes out. I don't know, maybe the insurer couldn't. Maybe this is a creation of a public duty as opposed to a private duty, which under the law doesn't really create any type of liability.
Right.
I don't know. So that's why I'm suggesting maybe if you can check with somebody and see if they've had this type of question in the past, or the city attorney, and get some type of an answer to that.
Yeah.
Because absent that, I have absolutely no problem with this. Thank you.
Other questions? Well, any member of the audience like to address the commission on this text amendment? Well, Mr. Wise, do you think that you'd be able to get an answer to that question? I think it's a good question.
I mean, I can, have you guys ever tried to get an answer from FEMA? No, I mean, I can certainly do my best.
Well, is there a rush to pass this text amendment tonight?
No, not at all. You know, I think we will get to a point in the coming months, but at this point, no rush.
Okay, I think it makes sense to make sure we're fully informed on this issue, so unless there's.
Mr. Chairman, do you need a motion to table it?
Mr. Glasky?
Yeah, I would just suggest, since we're not moving forward on this tonight, that in section 25-494, where they wanted to take the or out of section A, that we just combine A and B. There's really no reason to have
Two
A,
separate.
B, and C.
No, that's even better.
Just,
Lovely.
Yeah, that's even better.
it's on the page 2 of the proposed amendment. So that A would be on the site for fewer than 180 days and be fully licensed and ready for highway use, comma, or then go on and label section C as section B.
That's a good suggestion. Mr. Demmett?
Do you have to get FEMA's approval on these changes, is that right? So you had to go to them already for that?
Yeah.
Okay. The only other, and I don't know if it's a typo or not, but in 25-477-3A, one of the changes, the additions, the Federal Insurance Administrator's FIS and illustrative materials for St. Louis County dated August 2nd, 1995, and August 23rd, 2000 as amended, and any future revisions thereto. Then you drop down to 25-479, and it references only the August 2nd, 1995 report. I didn't know if it should also have the August 23rd one in there, or if that was a typo, or if it was intended to be not included. You see what I'm saying?
Yes.
Okay,
I'll get it clarified.
okay.
You might be getting a job offer from FEMA here. Mr. McDonald?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I have a question, it may be a dumb question, but going back to the issue, or frankly, any of these issues, but specifically on the substantial damage or substantial improvement topic, does the city have any obligation to notify property owners that this text amendment is under consideration? We're looking at doing something for the benefit of those owners and reducing their flood insurance, but there's also a potential increased financial responsibility that they may have. And I don't know if that's outside of the procedure for a text amendment or what, but it seems like we do on many applications, it might be worthwhile to notify them that this is afoot.
So they already get notice from, the constructive notice from publishing of the meeting. Question is,
Right.
do they get the 300-foot additional notice that we
On something
provide?
like this, typically, we would not. But I think, and I'm kind of looking at the map to see how many properties we're dealing with here. I see no reason why we couldn't make it a point that every one of them gets a letter saying, when the public hearing is going to be.
If that's not totally outside the realm of feasibility, I don't think it's a bad idea. Again, you're trying to do something good for those owners, and it'll be up to them to weigh what's the lesser issue, pay a higher insurance rate or have to potentially.
Now, I would also say that it hasn't been done at this point, but I would guess that if we were to not take these changes up as a city, that in some point near future after that, that they would reapproach us and tell us we had to. At least some of those incorporate.
That we would have to, or what?
Or we would be in jeopardy of not having flood insurance in the city of Brentwood.
Okay.
Which would be,
Yeah.
potentially
be bad.
catastrophic
Right, sure.
for people that own property down there. You wouldn't be able to get a federally backed mortgage for anything.
Okay.
Okay, good idea. Any further questions on this topic? And if not, entertain a motion to table.
So moved.
Second?
All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? All right, motion carries. Thank you, Mr. Wise. Good staff reports again. Aldermanic report, no one's here. City planner report,
Can I just get clarification on that last motion? Who made the motion and who seconded it?
I made the motion.
Mr. Glowski and Mr. Plufka.
And no report, Mr. Chairman.
No need for a site plan review. I think we can just take this text amendment up at the next meeting. Rationale, Mr. Wise, you can handle that first text amendment.
Yes, sir.
Any other business? Is there a motion to adjourn?
So moved, Mr. Chairman.
Second.
All in favor? Aye. Any opposed? All right, we're adjourned.